Hello, and welcome to Conversations from the World of Allergy, a podcast produced by the American Academy of Allergy, Asthma, and Immunology. I'm your host, Dave Stukas. I'm a board-certified allergist and immunologist and serve as the social media medical editor for the Academy. Our podcast series will use different formats to interview thought leaders from the world of allergy and immunology. This podcast is not intended to provide any individual medical advice to our listeners. We do hope that our conversations provide evidence-based information. Any questions pertaining to one's own health should always be discussed with their personal physician. The Find an Allergist search engine on the Academy website is a useful tool to locate a listing of board-certified allergists in your area. Finally, use of this audio program is subject to the American Academy of Allergy, Asthma, and Immunology Terms of Use Agreement, which you can find at www.faaai.org. Today's edition of our Conversations from the World of Allergy podcast series offers a unique discussion surrounding a new study conducted and coordinated by the National Institutes of Health, and the study is called the Systemic Allergic Reactions to SARS-CoV-2 Vaccination Trial, which is a mouthful, but we're going to get into that in just a second. This trial is currently enrolling participants at over 30 sites across the United States, and we are pleased to welcome two of the investigators involved in this study to offer more details and perspective. Dr. Lisa Wheatley is the Section Chief for Food Allergy, Atopic Dermatitis, and Allergic Mechanisms at the National Institute of Allergy and Infectious Disease in Rockville, Maryland, and Dr. Franklin Adkinson is a Professor of Medicine and Director of the Graduate Training Program in Clinical Investigation at the Johns Hopkins Asthma and Allergy Center in Baltimore. Well, thank you both so much for taking time to join us today, and welcome to the podcast.
Thank you.
Thank you for inviting us.
Oh, this is going to be great. This is an exciting study. And before we discuss some of the background and details with this specific research study, can you both offer some insight as to your role with this trial? Dr. Wheatley, let's start with you. How did you get involved and what is your role?
So obviously the National Institute of Allergy and Infectious Diseases is taking a primary role in trying to understand the SARS-CoV-2 pandemic. And so when the question came up about anaphylaxis to the new mRNA lipid nanoparticle vaccines, obviously my branch, the allergy branch, was contacted, and we started the investigation as to what should we do to look into this, and then contacted scientific advisors.
Excellent. And Dr. Atkinson, you're listed as a co-investigator for the study. What does that entail?
Well, I'm one of three investigators who have an interest in hypersensitivity reactions to medicines and vaccines, who were invited to participate in a discussion group to identify what needs to be done, supported by the NIH, to reassure the population who are receiving the vaccine that it indeed is safe and effective. Of course, the issue for us is safety, and particularly the issue of allergy or allergic reactions to the vaccine.
And along those lines, Dr. Atkinson, if you can summarize, and this is a loaded question, I understand, but to the best of your ability, what do we know about the reports of allergic or anaphylactic reactions to the Moderna and Pfizer mRNA COVID vaccines thus far? Do we have any idea of a common link or cause as to why these are occurring?
Well, that's a complicated question, David, and the answers are not fully known, or we wouldn't be doing this study. But basically, the original studies that resulted in the licensing of the two mRNA vaccines didn't have any anaphylactic reactions, so it was hoped that the allergic profile of these vaccines would be very small. But once the vaccine was disseminated, first in Great Britain and then in the United States, there were several notable cases of anaphylaxis, which is an immediate allergic reaction to the vaccine shortly after it's administered. Reported, and these were somewhat unexpected. You don't see these types of anaphylactic reactions to the standard flu vaccine, and so surveillance was begun through the CDC's surveillance system to record reported reactions to vaccines in the US, and those have now been published, showing a vaccine reaction rate involving serious allergic reactions of between 5 and 10 or 11 per million vaccinations. So what we know is that the serious allergic reactions are rare based on early data, and yet there's more than what would have been expected. And the question is, are there certain individuals who are more susceptible to these reactions? And if so, can we identify those? Is it related at all to their prior allergic history in terms of previous serious experiences with drugs or vaccines? Or can we find, with a more serious control study going forward, that the expected serious reactions are indeed very low and are clearly identifiable when they occur?
Mm. In this whole pandemic has been such a lesson in trying to standardize as much as possible in real time while things unfold and often change before our very eyes. So the fact that you were able to coordinate this study and get it up and running in relatively short time is really inspirational, and I look forward to learning more about it. And along those lines, Dr. Wheatley, can you tell us more about what this study is investigating, and specifically if you could talk about the primary and secondary outcomes?
Yeah, so as Dr. Adkinson said, what we really need is reliable prospective data on the incidence and severity of allergic reactions in the population, and particularly in those people who are highly allergic, because they've had multiple anaphylaxis in the past, or are at otherwise high risk, mostly being in this study, people with mast cell disorders, to determine whether in fact there is an appreciable risk of reaction. Because what we really like to do, and what we absolutely expect, is that anaphylaxis will be rare. And therefore we can reassure the population that this is a safe vaccination. On the other hand, if we are wrong, and even if the risk is somewhat more moderate, what we then would want to do is to try to figure out why are these reactions happening. And because this is a prospective study, we will have pre and post-vaccination samples to look at mechanisms. And then if we can determine, well, what is the risk, we then may be able to establish safe mechanisms to vaccinate individuals.
And so is this study looking at the number of individuals who experience an immediate allergic or anaphylactic reaction while they're enrolled in the study? Is that the main outcome you're looking at?
Yes, so the main outcome is exactly that. We will vaccinate individuals and we will observe them for 90 minutes after the vaccination, and we will be evaluating the proportion of patients who have systemic allergic reactions to each of the Pfizer, BioNTech, and the Moderna vaccines.
And Dr. Wheatley, you mentioned this term prospective a couple of times. Can you briefly discuss why a prospective evaluation would offer a little more strength compared to sort of retrospectively looking at events that have occurred in the past?
So the problem with looking backwards is obviously that it's not unbiased. So when we do a prospective study, we're taking in individuals who've never had the vaccine, and we have investigators who actually don't know what the person is receiving. So they have no bias as to what's about to happen. When people report things after the fact, two problems occur. One is that you mostly hear about people who have problems, because after all, they're the ones who want to tell you about it. And two, you don't really understand exactly what the problem was, because you don't have the data from that time.
Okay. All right, Dr. Adkinson, can you give us some details in regards to who's being recruited for this study. So who are you looking to include or exclude?
Okay. So there are three groups of subjects being recruited for the study. The first are those who have had severe allergies, allergic reactions in the past, either needing an injection of epinephrine after encounter with a food allergen, or being stung by a bee, or have had severe reactions to medications given in the past, or other vaccines. So that's one group, and that's the group that we're asking the question: because of past severe reactions, are you at greater risk for a problem with this vaccine? The second group are patients who have mast cell disorders that put them, for other reasons, at risk for more frequent and more easily provoked acute allergic reactions, to see whether they are at increased risk. And third is a control group, that is patients who have no allergies, to be used to compare a non-allergic background reaction rate with those who have had either currently have a mast cell disorder, or who have had serious allergic reactions in the past.
And is there anybody who would not be eligible for this study? For instance, if they have severe asthma, or they're taking biologic treatments for any condition, or they're reliant on oral steroids, for instance?
Well, if they meet the criteria that are set up by the CDC for administering the vaccine, and they don't have any of the exclusions for this particular study, of which there are a number, they are eligible to participate. So, for example, one excluded group are those who've had documented severe allergic reactions to any ingredient within the vaccine. Now, because these are new vaccines that we've never had in our armamentarium in the past, with regard to the use of mRNA rather than viral proteins to immunize patients, there are very few going to be excluded on the basis of that. The other ingredient that is of concern is something found in many different medicines and vaccines called polyethylene glycol, and there are a few very rare patients who are allergic to that, and if they are known to be allergic to that, they get excluded from the study.
Dave, can I also make a comment?
Pregnancy is an exclusion factor, as well as it is in many studies of this type. I'm sorry.
That's okay, my fault. Dave, I did just want to note that people on biologic therapies and systemic steroids are not in the trial, not because we think that really necessarily will interfere with their response to vaccination, but for the studies we're looking at to figure out why vaccinations might cause anaphylaxis or an allergic reaction, those would likely interfere with those studies.
That makes sense. Well, I think that's a great overview, and obviously we're going to provide links for this for everybody listening, and to make sure they can go to the website and look at all of the extensive inclusion-exclusion criteria. But that's a good overview to help us at least get in the right mindset of what types of patients you're looking at, or those who may not be eligible. Now, Dr. Wheatley, you mentioned before that after participants receive the vaccine, they'll be observed for 90 minutes. But what else will this study entail? Are you taking blood samples or other types of laboratory studies or samples, and how many visits will be necessary?
Yes, so the participants will not be just sitting there waiting for something to be happening. Prior to vaccination, we will be getting lab specimens, and then after the vaccination, we'll be getting lab specimens, and that will be whether or not you are having a reaction. Because it's important to be able to compare people who have been vaccinated or sitting there happy as clams compared to people who have been vaccinated and are having a reaction. So we're getting a really quite wide variety of samples, looking at really most of the possibilities we could come up with to think of why a systemic allergic reaction might happen. And in fact, we're getting some of the non-directed lab samples. So, you can only find what you look for to a certain degree, but there are a lot of kinds of mechanistic sampling nowadays, which looks at proteins and what kind of mRNA is produced by the cells and things like that we are also going to be collecting sort of as a way to look at, well, what could we have missed if we can't explain it with our usual specimens looking at mast cell products or complement or the contact activation system.
And are there more than one visit entailed? So is it they'll get, especially obviously if they get 2 doses of the vaccine, they need to come twice, but are there other visits in between those doses or afterwards?
This is a placebo-controlled trial because we know that allergic appearing reactions can happen even in the absence of true allergy. As you know from my title, I oversee a lot of food allergy studies, and so we absolutely always use a placebo control because you can be fooled in thinking that someone is having an allergic reaction when they are not. So 1/3 of the participants will actually get a first dose, which is placebo. Neither they nor the team administering it will know that. So for a person who gets the Virum vaccines from the start, they will have 2 visits, which will be followed by 2 phone calls. If they are in the placebo group, they will get 3 visits, the placebo injection and then the 2 Virum injections.
Okay. And Dr. Adkinson, you mentioned before about those that you're looking at, specifically with different types of allergic conditions, such as food allergy or medication allergies, or even allergic rhinitis. But on the surface, it would seem like those patients would be very different from one another, and also different from those with mast cell disorders. And this is I'm giving you the really hard questions. I apologize. But can you just give us some background as to how those overlap? Is there some common thread about those individuals and their allergy cells, for instance, as to why they may respond differently to these vaccines?
Very good question. I think the current accepted dogma is that most cases of anaphylaxis, which is the acute onset of a crisis disorder, result from the activation of mast cells. And mast cells can be activated in a number of ways by the allergic antibody, IgE, that attaches to them and recognizes things that we're allergic to, like foods or medicines or pollens at this time of year. And then there are certain disorders where mast cells, even without the presence of IgE antibody, have a lower threshold for being activated by other pathways, shall we say. And so the acute allergic reactions, the ones that are life-threatening and very serious, are presumed to be one way or another the result of activating mast cells. And that's the common feature of all of these groups of patients that are being studied.
And along those lines, Dr. Adkinson, how will the study coordinators ensure that somebody enrolled truly has these allergic conditions or a mast cell disorder?
Well, the patient's history and any available medical record can be consulted, but there's a requirement for extensive retrieval of medical records to document the allergies. But there are a few sentinel events that are unlikely to be ambiguous, such as the use of epinephrine, for example, to treat the reaction, and the time frame in which the reaction occurred. So the reactions have to be relatively recent, within the last 5 years. So that precludes having to go back and look at what might have happened 20 or 30 years ago.
Dr. Wheatley, how many people are you trying to enroll in this study? And along those lines, why are there so many sites involved?
Well, I think you can go backwards from that, which is why are there so many sites involved? And that's because we're looking for 3,400 people. And 2/3 of those people will be those that fall into the highly allergic or mast cell disorder group. And so to get that kind of number, you do need a lot of investigators at a lot of sites talking to a lot of people.
That makes perfect sense. And how many sites are there roughly?
There are 30 roughly at this point.
Okay. And are they, I assume they're spread out across the United States geographically?
They are. We have people from coast to coast and from north to south.
Wow. I'm amazed that you were able to get all of this put together in such a fast timeline, and now you're at the point where you're actually enrolling studies, enrolling participants rather. It's amazing. Dr. Adkinson, is this safe to do? What happens if someone has an allergic reaction to one of these vaccines during the study? You both mentioned that this is a relatively rare phenomenon, but what precautions are being taken in case somebody does have anaphylaxis?
Well, it's an interesting question, but it's one that's easy to answer. These studies will be done in facilities that will be manned by trained allergy specialists and their staff, and all of the necessary equipment and medications to treat acute allergy will be present. It's really not different, if you think about it, from patients who were on allergen immunotherapy, who are coming to their allergist to get treated with something they're known to be allergic to, and a small fraction of whom will have an immediate reaction that requires identification and early treatment. So for allergists, this is not an unfamiliar circumstance, and hopefully patients will see it the same way.
Mm-hmm. And, as you mentioned, that this is happening in a general population along the lines of 5 to 10 out of a million. And if you're enrolling 3,400, I suppose it's quite possible nobody would have anaphylaxis. Is that correct?
That is correct, and that is a concern. And it's only because of the urgency of doing the study sooner rather than later that we can't have a sample size that would assure that we have enough of the immediate reactions to be able to study them mechanistically. But we will be able to determine with the sample size that's chosen for this study, whether what the reaction rate is and whether it's an increased level in patients who have a strong allergic background.
Mm-hmm. Dr. Wheatley, along the lines of safety and monitoring, if you take this to the 30,000-foot level, how do you coordinate and make sure that across all these different sites and all of these participants that things are going smoothly and you're not seeing any scary signals? And what is, along those lines, I guess, can you explain what a DSMB is?
Yeah, so from the 30,000-foot level, it really isn't that high up because we have site monitors who will be in contact with the sites every week during this trial, discussing what's happening, and I will be receiving adverse event reports to look for, not anaphylaxis, obviously. I will be notified about that right away, but are there any patterns that don't look good? In addition, then, to the monitors and to myself, we have the Data Safety Monitoring Board. And they are a group of experts in allergy, as well as statistics and ethics, who review the protocol and consent before we ever sent it to an investigational review board to be reviewed, to make sure that it is, in fact, a worthwhile study and that it is a study with safety in mind. And they will also be reviewing the results, including the adverse events, if any, every 500 participants to make sure that, in fact, this study is going well and we are not exposing people to a risk that is not understood.
I think that's great insight for a lot of our listeners who don't understand what is involved in getting something like this up and running and then monitoring it over time. So, Dr. Wheatley, I want to ask you the million-dollar question. How many evening or weekend conference calls have you had already just to get things up and running?
What I'd have to say is that this has largely consumed my life for the last 4 months.
Dr. Adkinson, would you agree with that as well for yourself?
Well, I'm less involved than Dr. Wheatley in terms of the setting up of the many different details of the study. But even at an individual site like Johns Hopkins, where I am, it takes a lot of paperwork and discussions and arrangements to set up a study like this, especially when timeliness is crucial because of the need for early data to have a public health impact, which is what is really driving the need for this study.
Mm-hmm. Dr. Wheatley, you mentioned 3,400 participants, but how long do you anticipate that this study will last? What are you hoping? How soon are you hoping to enroll that number of people?
We're hoping to get that number of people in 8 to 12 weeks. Obviously, it's timely because, thankfully, large numbers of people are getting enrolled in the United States in vaccination. So we hope to see the end of the worst of the pandemic, at least. And also, to be timely, if it takes too long, we won't get the answer necessarily for this particular vaccine. But I'd like to point out that part of our interest in this study is, in fact, the vaccine platform. And this mRNA lipid nanoparticle platform is very, very new. And also very, very exciting because we went from, a disease discovery in December of one year to widespread vaccination in December of the next year. So I see this platform as being, in some sense, possibly the future of vaccination. So if we can understand if there are problems with it, we can engineer them out potentially.
Mm-hmm. Hey, Dr. Adkinson, you've touched upon this, and as you know, there are millions of people in the United States and beyond that have food allergies, medication allergies, venom allergies, not to mention those who have mast cell disorders. And along the distribution of these COVID vaccines, every single time an adverse reaction is reported, it heightens anxiety within this community. And I'm sure some are even scared to learn about this new research study, thinking maybe it's not safe for them to get. So what do you say to those individuals about the safety of these vaccines? Do they have to be in this research study, or can they safely receive them as they normally would in the community?
Well, there's several questions there I think I can try to address. One is the issue of whether they could safely receive the vaccine outside of the study. And in all cases, the answer is yes, in terms of guidelines that we're all now living under from the CDC and the FDA. But many will be adverse to taking that risk because of their frightening experiences with allergic reactions in the past. And we think that they will be appropriately attracted to the study because they will get their vaccination, which provides unequivocal benefit to them in the safest possible environment. That is, an environment that's monitored by experts who know how to handle any serious allergic reactions, and with appropriate staff to respond immediately rather than going home and then having something happen when you're away from a medical environment. So we think there are a lot of attractive reasons why people who are frightened or who are just concerned, and maybe not going to the level of anxiety that they're going to say no, but they've been postponing their vaccination because of their memory of what happened to them when they took some vaccine in the past or had a bad reaction to peanuts, for example, and don't want to go through that again. Those will be the ones who will be treated in the study, and appropriately so, and will provide them, in this case, with unequivocal benefit that will outweigh in the assessment of almost everyone the risk of having these reactions if they occur, and certainly in terms of any life-threatening potential, um, um, uh, which is going to be minimal or non-existent, really.
Mm-hmm. So as you mentioned, really, there's very clearly established criteria that seem to be doing a fantastic job of really separating out those at real risk, and that would be anybody with a known allergy to any of the ingredients to these vaccines. And as you mentioned, there's very few ingredients in there that are known to cause allergy, other than potentially the polyethylene glycol or polysorbate for some of them. Or if they've had known adverse or anaphylactic reaction to their first dose. But otherwise, the vast majority of people absolutely can get these vaccines very safely in the community. But as you mentioned, I love that you mentioned this study offers a very unique opportunity where if they do have concern or if they're putting it off for whatever reason, this is how to do it. So, and this is the time to do it and how to do it for those folks that really do have a lot of concern regarding it. So I think the timing is perfect, especially as these roll out. And Dr. Adkinson, along those lines, what do you say to your patients to reassure them about the safety of these COVID vaccines? I'm sure you've had these conversations probably every day for the last few months.
Yes, I think all of the investigators involved in these 30 centers have had ongoing dialogues with patients and with referring physicians about the risks associated with vaccination in patients like the ones in this study who have had serious problems in the past. Again, this is easier to do than would be the case if this were not a life-saving, extremely important public health vaccination program that we're talking about here. If this were the standard flu vaccine, then the option of opting out of becoming vaccinated becomes more realistic because the risks are so much smaller. But I think most of us feel and communicate to our patients that the value of the vaccination in this pandemic era here greatly exceeds any possible risk that they could have from a study that's designed specifically to minimize any impact of an adverse event that might occur from the vaccination itself.
That's great perspective. I think a lot of folks are looking at this as just one question of is the vaccine safe or not? But as you mentioned, it's really in the context of is the vaccine safe compared to me getting infection during a global pandemic? And Dr. Wheatley, I'd love for you to chime in as well. Have you had similar thoughts and conversations with folks about the safety of these vaccines, or any other pearls you'd like to add?
No, I think that really covers it, that you're looking at a risk that we're trying to understand if it's real even. So honestly, my entire hope is that we will vaccinate 3,400 people and not see a reaction. Because I honestly think it is safe, and a lot of the study is based on, we want to reassure people that it is safe, even if you have had a reaction in the past to a substance that was frightening and clearly risky. So I think that really is an important part of what we're doing. The other thing I want to sort of mention is that we're also looking for people who are not at risk, because we're trying to do a comparison between people who are highly allergic or have mast cell disorders versus pretty much everyone else. So, it's another way to get vaccinated, and I guess in my world, help science.
That's excellent. Hey, Dr. Wheatley, how can people enroll in the study? Hopefully folks are listening and they're interested, or our colleagues are listening and they can refer their patients. Do people need a referral from an allergist, or can they initiate contact on their own to talk to a study coordinator?
Absolutely. They can initiate contact. We are on clinicaltrials.gov under SARS vaccination, and we are hoping people will volunteer, and they can directly contact the sites that are listed there. There will be a contact information, so they should look and see if there's one near them.
Okay, excellent. And again, we'll put links to this on the website and show notes and things like that. Dr. Atkinson, we just heard Dr. Wheatley's hypothesis that she shared with us. Do you have any guesses as to what the study may find?
Well, I think we probably will see a few reactions, and that will be an advantage with regard to a better understanding, as Dr. Wheatley was saying, as part of the object for the study of what the mechanism is. What is it that's capable of rarely triggering an acute allergic-like reaction? But if we were to study 2,500 patients who have had bad allergic reactions in the past and not a single one of them reacts, that would be a successful study. Even though we can't study mechanisms of what doesn't exist, it says that having an allergic reaction in the past doesn't put you at greater risk for a problem with this vaccine. And that would be a wonderful message to be able to go public with at this point in time. And as Dr. Wheatley says, for future mRNA vaccines that are undoubtedly coming down the road.
This is the beauty of science, right? This is, you do it you try to answer questions in a systematic way and control for as much as you can, and then we'll see what answers come out on the other end and interpret them accordingly. It's fantastic. Well, Dr. Wheatley, thank you so much for taking time to join us today, and I really wish you the best with recruitment. I hope that this helps, and I hope that you exceed your expectations in regards to getting all of the patients enrolled in a timely fashion. Is there anything else you'd like to add?
No, I do very much so appreciate this opportunity to talk about what I think is a very exciting study.
Excellent. Dr. Atkinson, thank you as well for taking the time. I know you're both very busy with your schedules, and I wish you the best as well with the study and interpreting all the findings that you have. Do you have any parting words for our listeners?
Well, only to reemphasize what I think we've been talking about here, and that's how excited and invested we are in this very important study. And no matter how it turns out, we will have made an advance in knowledge that's going to be appreciated by the large number of patients who have allergic problems in our society. So this is a step in the right direction, and those who participate will be making a major contribution to understanding for others as well as themselves what the risks are and how they can be best identified if they exist and managed in the future.
Excellent. Well, there's zero pressure here, not to put you on the spot, but I look forward to reaching out again at the conclusion of the study, and once you have everything ready to report out, that hopefully we can have you both on again to tell us what you found. That'd be very exciting. Thank you both again for joining us.
Our pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you.
Please visit www.faaai.org for show notes and any pertinent links from today's conversation. If you like the show, please take a moment to subscribe to our podcast through Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, or Spotify so you can receive new episodes in the future. Thank you again for listening.